Hey, Kayla.
What's up, Nyla?
I'm just excited to welcome everybody to our new podcast, Preservation for the People, where we talk about cultural heritage preservation and conservation as Black people.
We are your hosts. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Nyla.
Let's get into it.
So this is the pilot episode of Preservation for the People, brought to you by the Black Art Conservators.
Yeah, we like to call the Black Art Conservators BAC for short. It's a collective of Black preservation professionals supporting each other, building community, and seeking change in the predominantly white field of cultural heritage preservation.
This podcast is our way of creating our own platform to express what's important to us and to create a space to share other important perspectives in preservation.
Because, yeah, we're not only your hosts, but two founding members of the Black Art Conservators.
It all started back on July 13th, 2020, when we posted the BAC statement to support the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement and demand racial justice in art conservation. You can read the statement on our website at blackartconservators.com. We started with 12 members and have since expanded to 20.
We are predominantly made up of members from the United States, but we've got people from South Africa, Canada, and Norway. And we have a variety of specialties from architectural preservation to paper conservation to time-based media.
BAC has folks who are early in their careers and professionals who've been in the industry for decades. Each member joined for a different reason, but with the general motivations of wanting to see a sense of community and space to express our frustrations about the current state of the field of preservation and also talk about our hopes for the future.
So Nyla, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your career and what your reason was for joining.
So to start at the beginning, I went to grad school at the Winter University of Delaware program for art conservation. I got my bachelor's degree in archaeology from Stanford University. So I'm used to like the predominantly white institution kind of a thing. And I think that when I, decided I want to go into conservation and decided to go to Winter and stuff, I was just like stealing myself for that. I was like, okay, time to be like the only Black person in the room for a while. So I joined BAC because, I actually helped craft our like kind of founding statement. And that was a really organic kind of process. We were just trying to figure out what to do in 2020 when all of these museums were making these statements and just being like, oh, like we care about people and blah, 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 like platitudes. And we were just like, how do we say, no, we don't believe you? Like, do more, do better. I was just like mad. And this is what happened. Like, I don't know. I feel like it just came out of like, I was like, I gotta say words. I'm angry. How do I like express this to the powers that be? But similarly, like, what about you, Kayla? How did you get into conservation and then into BAC?
I actually got into conservation because of my love for video games, believe it or not, specifically the Harvest Moon series.
Wait, okay. Can you break that down a little bit? I haven't played Harvest Moon.
Yeah, of course. These games start with you inheriting a broken down family farm, and you're tasked with building and shaping back the farm, and you connect with your heritage, unearth a lot of artifacts, and you can also donate to the local museum and restore local monuments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense how you got into it if it's talking about museums and stuff.
Yeah, so when I was getting my bachelor's in photography and optics is when I learned about conservation. And once I learned about conservation, I was like, this is the right thing to do. And so I ended up volunteering for a conservation lab. That's when I learned about time-based media and moving image preservation. I met people from the Strong Museum of Play, and one of them informed me they had a conservator who worked on video games. And I was like, this is more exact, and this is more what I would like to do. In terms of joining Black art conservators, like Nyla said, like I was also very angry and very sad and in an emotional turmoil at that time. And I felt like I needed to say something or do something that I felt like I had some sort of voice or I could be vocal about. just like in solidarity with each other and just like being there for each other. And I think that's what I valued the most being part of Black Art Conservators is that we're here for each other. And I just enjoy that community so much.
Yeah, that's so real. But before we get too deep in the weeds, we kind of need to lay some groundwork to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about here. So, first and foremost, what is conservation?
A lot of people might see the word conservation and think of environmental conservation and saving the ducks. But in this podcast, we are discussing conservation of cultural heritage, which includes historical sites, art, artifacts, and more, like the kinds of things you see in museums.
There's one definition that I think does a pretty good job of explaining conservation from the International Council of Museums, and that's all measures and actions aimed at safeguarding tangible cultural heritage while ensuring its accessibility to present and future generations.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good definition, but it just fails to take into account the intangible aspects of cultural heritage conservation.
Yeah, I mean, for me as an objects conservator, I operate in the tangible a lot because I'm literally working with objects. But people ascribe all sorts of intangible meaning to tangible things. For example, the first time that I really felt like I reckoned with the idea of like intangible meanings on tangible objects was I was listening to a talk. They were talking about an object, essentially a head sculpture, and the sculpture itself is buried underground in front of a house, and it's supposed to protect your house and safeguard your house. And so the head and the sculpture itself isn't really like the crux of the thing. It's like what it's doing for your house. Like you don't even see it because it's buried underground. And then so like to take that and like put it kind of in a museum for display and like talk about it is interesting and tricky because like it's no longer doing what it's supposed to be doing, but at the same time like you want to be able to see it and appreciate it. And so it's these kind of conflicting ideas, and so that's why like taking into account intangible meanings is so important, because it really does affect like everything from how you interact with the object, want to see it, view it, and everything like that. And so that's why I think the definition needs to be still broadened.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the tangible a lot as a time based media conservator because I'm working with things like film, video games, and born digital works, where there isn't an actual physical, tangible object.
For sure, for sure. And you'll hear us say conservation and preservation a lot in this podcast. So, Kayla, what do you think the difference is between those two?
That is a good question. I'll start off my answer with this. When I knew that conservation was a profession that I could get into, I assumed it was a person who did work in a museum. And I always thought that when it comes to preservation, I always thought of like libraries and like
Mm,
librarians and like archivists and professions like that.
shout out to libraries.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Shout out to libraries.
I love
Amazing.
libraries.
I feel like preservation is this term that is a little bit broader than conservation. And I think because conservation started with like paintings, it makes sense to think of it largely through a fine art lens.
Yeah, I also think of conservation as kind of a subset of preservation. And that's maybe as specific as I can get because conservation is changing. And it's harder for me to speak to preservation as a whole since I'm deeper in the conservation world. But yeah, that's part of why the show is about preservation, because we want to keep it open and talk to all kinds of people in the field, like archaeologists, anthropologists, historic preservationists, everything like that. Which brings us to the interview section of our show. Woo. So, in each episode, we will interview someone who's making a difference in Black preservation. We want to do more than just acknowledge the incredible work being done to preserve and share Black stories and Black history. We want to hear directly from Black conservators, archivists, preservationists, anthropologists, and more.
All right. So our guest for today is Dr. Kwesi Daniels. He is the department head and associate professor of architecture at Tuskegee University. But before we dive into questions, I wanted to give Dr. Daniels the chance to tell us a bit more about himself.
Well, good afternoon. I'm originally from New Jersey. However, I came to Tuskegee as an undergrad to study architecture. And I did leave, but I kind of didn't leave. I've spent more than 20 years off and on at Tuskegee working, and it's been just such an amazing experience for me that I say every time I come back, I feel like I earn another degree.
All right. So, can you briefly take us through your path on how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, it depends on how much time you have. The path forward has been very interesting for me. I came to Tuskegee as an undergrad to study architecture. And over my time here, I had a chance to go and study in Chicago for a while.
Mm.
So coming out of the East Coast, coming to the South, and then going to the Midwest, there was this thing that I didn't realize was always embedded in me, which was, why do our communities look the way they do? I learned where we were supposed to be coming out of the civil rights movement, but I didn't see that growing up. I studied architecture, so I learned how buildings are supposed to be put together, and we created all these beautiful designs. Like, yeah, give me a magazine. I want to be features, right? But that didn't mean that I knew how to go into our community and make change. My first internship was actually in preservation. I was in North Philadelphia documenting Black spaces with the Historic American Building Survey, and it was amazing. But I didn't see myself in it. Everyone that I was looking around, none of them looked like me. We had different views, different understandings, and I was like, this must not be for me. So I left it. I was like, I came to be an architect. I ain't come here to do no preservation stuff. So go to Chicago, learn about sustainability, come back to Tuskegee, and I'm like, man, sustainability is a thing. I love this thing, and went hard for sustainability for a long while. And actually, preservation to me is a component of sustainability, right? Because the most sustainable building is one that's already built. So I left Tuskegee. Went back to New Jersey and New York and Philadelphia area and got a master's in sustainability management at Columbia, and was still concerned because that original question I had about how do we solve the needs of our communities, no one was touching the social component of it. So it was like, well, if we affect all the environmental conditions, things are going to be improved. But our neighborhoods are always the ones that are bad environmentally. Well, if we just throw money at it, things will improve. Well, we throw money at it and those neighborhoods are transformed and our people can't stay in them. So it's like, well, those aren't solving the problem. So I went to
Right.
Temple University and I studied urban geography. And that allowed me to wrap my head around, how did our communities get here? It was not this large like conference where all the Black people from all over the country came together. It was like, okay, so how you want your neighborhood to look? I want trash in it. No, give me the worst. Give me the worst like school system. Why y'all gotta have the bad school system? I'm a big beat y'all. Give me the worst grocery store ever. Like that didn't happen, right? So in that process, I had the opportunity to really do a deep dive and see how universities could have impacted Black communities, and
Mhm.
was able to study the impact that Drexel University and University of Pennsylvania and Temple University had on the Black community of Philly and North Philly and West Philly. And so in that process, I also was able to naively think, man, my dissertation, when it gets published, woo, we're about to change the world. But all the while, I was watching all this change happening. Like the world was changing, but my dissertation wasn't going to do anything for it. And that's when I realized preservation was it. While I was there doing my research, I had returned to Tuskegee to run the Department of Architecture. We're the only HBCU and I think the only college campus in the country that's a National Historic Landmark and a National Historic Site. We have National Park Service field office that's adjacent to our campus. Our campus is amazing. Like, the students built the campus with the faculty. We made the bricks and then made the buildings. Like the story is an amazing story. And we had started a preservation program while I was working on my dissertation. So I had this understanding of what we were doing at Tuskegee. I'm now in Philadelphia having a conversation with local residents, and all the moon stars came together, and it was like, yeah, preservation is it. Preservation is it. And from that, I realized all of the concerns I've had, all of the problems that I see. Preservation had the tools, it had the policies already in place, it had protections that people could take advantage of. we can document it. So, every building may not be able to be saved, but there's processes to make sure that these buildings don't go away and no one knows that it exists.
Right.
And there's processes to talk to communities and document the landscape. So, I mean, when that light bulb went off, it was like, it took you 20 years to arrive here. Man, what would it look like if you got here a lot faster? So, yeah, that's the quick story how I got to where I am now.
Thank you for that. Wow, that's like wonderful.
I mean, I like to believe everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
I lived in Philly for about 3 years, and I saw the Penn expanding to take down like the UC townhome. Like, to your point about preservation and like the building itself is not there anymore, but that story is definitely going to stay, or at least we hope so.
Well, we can capture it.
Yeah.
It's that acknowledgement that there are things that we can't do to stop things that are beyond our power, right? That serenity prayer. What I realized being in Philly in all that time is I saw buildings going down. And I saw murals that really told the story of neighborhoods. You throw a building up and you cover the mural. If you tear the building down, the mural goes away as well. But that doesn't mean that it has to go. It just means we have to explore some other avenues. So we can take photos and document that was there. So when someone says, when we see this area is a very expensive area and someone says, yeah, Black people used to live here. When they say, no, they didn't, you can say, well, I got the photos to prove it, right? Through preservation, we do a lot of digital documenting. So drones and laser scanning, 3D photography. I mean, we go hard in all these spaces. And so it now means I can come in and capture that building before you tear it down. I can capture it, process it, throw it in VR, and we could always look at it again to see what it looked like. Generations can continue to explore and know there was a footprint that we had in these environments. And although you tore down the physical evidence, we do have digital evidence of the space.
I'd use a VR headset for that. Walk through a building. Yeah.
So how does architecture to you relate to preservation?
Oh, man. I mean, they're integrated. When I just came back from Rome. I spent 2 months in Rome. And to be in an environment where I got a chance to visit ancient cities. And when you're in a space that measures its time in centuries, not decades, you're in a different place, right? When you're seeing buildings that were erected thousands of years ago and are still here and still operate. You see a city, Pompeii. It went from a volcanic eruption that buries the city to excavation. They are able to remove all of the volcanic ash that was there, all the stones, or not all of it, but they were able to excavate a lot of that. And you can walk through it. And you can still see artwork that was done back in first century. You can see, streets and sewer systems and infrastructure still operating. That's amazing. And that means that here, one of our problems is that we've separated out this idea of preservation from the creation of space. Because I believe that part of that is we're born out of this colonial idea. What you have is nothing because I'm going to come in, I'm going to reshape it, I'm going to rebrand it, I'm going to call it mine. Well, the easiest way to do that is you wipe out the image and identity of the people that used to be there. That means any buildings that you create, I wipe it out. Any infrastructure you have, I wipe it out. I wipe out everything I can wipe out until I can't wipe out anymore. When you visit indigenous mounds around the country, you realize they were able to wipe out everything, but some of the places, those mounds, you couldn't wipe those out. So those still are remnant. But if they could wipe it out, they would have, right? So when you understand that is how this culture has developed, and then you go to spaces where there are cultures that have developed on top of each other, then there was an appreciation for what came before. There was an understanding that we keep it. And so when we talk about the architecture of that space, that architecture is the record of the existence of the numerous cultures. I was in Cairo talking to a gentleman who was showing me around. He says, what people don't understand is Egypt has been conquered by about 5 different cultures over time. and he's measuring it in 500 and thousands of years. And I'm like, well, America, shoot, we haven't even hit 300. Y'all sit there talking about the five that have
Yeah.
destroyed you. So, as a trained architect, as a person who teaches architecture and runs an architecture program, being in this space, I realized that architecture and preservation are supposed to be married to each other. There is a symbiotic relationship because every building that you put up, once it goes up, it's an existing building. And so if you don't know how to deal with an existing building, you only know what to do, how to create a new building, then you're missing the more percentage component of the building because you only can put it up one time.
I want to kind of stay on this topic of discussing like terms and words, right? Because Kayla and I are both conservators, and conservation, like art conservation, is also a relatively new field, like talking about how America is like a new country, right? And so there's a lot of, I think, ideas that came out of it from its inception that kind of like we're trying to, in a very colonial way, like prove itself as a field, right? And I think we're starting to see that start to like be changed and examined and hopefully dismantled a little bit. But I really bring it up to say that, like, in this podcast by the Black Art Conservators group, but like we're interviewing people who are in preservation, but not necessarily conservation, right? And so one thing that I wanted to hear from you was just like the difference between conservation and preservation in terms of how you understand
Now you're
it.
about to get me in trouble. Oh, Lord.
We got your back. It's okay.
So I say that because when I was in Rome, I studied at the American Academy of Rome. And so we were surrounded by all these different scholars there were preservationists and artists and scholars. It was just like a lot of different people. And one of the people that I connected with while I was out there was a conservator. And I said, yeah, Tuskegee, we're developing a conservation lab. And she was like, so what do you think about conservation? How do you define it? I was like, are we going to like work with materials, with buildings? It's like, that's not conservation. So what I realized is that I'm new in terms of being head, feet, toes into this space after 20 years of dibbling and dabbling in it. And so I'm learning a lot about conservation and preservation. And so I'll talk about it from my understanding and how we're moving forward. So we're in the process of developing a materials conservation lab for architects so that we can better understand the materials of the buildings that we work with. For example, we work with a lot of rural communities who have wood frame buildings or brick buildings. They have paint that's used on it, and we need to be able to determine what's the chemical makeup of the paint so we can reproduce it, or what's the composition of the mortar so we can reconstitute that. We need to understand the brick that was produced here so we can match that brick if possible. The wood, we need to know what type of species wood this is so we can match that up. So for me, when I consider conservation, it's from a materials standpoint. From what I've learned about art conservation, and as I see that, it's more tied to how do we preserve the artwork that's been produced so that it's able to continue to be around for generations more. So protecting oil-based paints and really understanding how this technique was used in order to create this. To me, this all fits under the umbrella of preservation. We currently use the term historic preservation. I lean more closer to cultural preservation. It's more than the building. It's the stories. It's the artwork. To see a fresco on the wall and it's still there. It's going through all these changes, yet it's still there. Or to see a mosaic on the ground and it still tells the story of this environment. That same thing exists with our spaces.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my goodness. I think about that a lot as well. Like conservation is just like this subcategory of preservation. And I think about it a lot because I study time-based media conservation and movie and image archiving. And with that said, sometimes I find myself questioning, how does time-based media conservation fit into art conservation when you don't necessarily always have the physical material
Well, I know when I learned that you studied looking at time based media. First of all, I was like, man, you're gonna be busy for a long time. As somebody who loves digital space, I also realized that we have such a fragile society. Somebody needs to understand how to preserve these things that are being built in the digital environment to preserve them. If we don't figure out what are the processes to keep these things alive, nobody will come back hundreds of years later and be able to say what we can say when we go over to Egypt or other ancient cities, because there will literally be no record of our existence because we put it on something that was obsolete by design.
Yeah. We could definitely have another conversation about this. I have a lot of thoughts about that. Speaking of, like, for example, flash code, but going back to this interview. So the next set of questions are mostly about the projects that you're working on, mentorship, sustainability, and outreach.
Because like we see you do a lot of that in your work.
Right.
And like conservation wasn't necessarily built with like a big outreach component in kind of the work. And so that's something that is also like hopefully changing, but we feel like it's really necessary.
Yeah. So I guess this is a pretty general question, but if you can tell us a little bit about the projects you're working at Tuskegee.
Sure. So it really runs a full range from documenting spaces on Tuskegee's campus to working with rural schoolhouses in Macon County. Now I'm working with a schoolhouse in called the Armstrong School in the Armstrong community of Macon County, Alabama. It's a 1900 schoolhouse that was built by a Tuskegee alum using plans from Tuskegee and the guidance from Robert R. Taylor, who was the first professionally trained African American architect in the country and designed most of the buildings on our campus. So that's one set of work that I engage in. Then there's the civil rights movement, which amazing, right? Because we know this story. You hear about Dr. King and Ralph David Abernathy. You learn about the Black Panther Party and Stokely Carmichael and Eldridge Cleaver. Like, these are names that, if you were stoked in Black liberation movements, these are names that you learn about. And so for me, it's such an honor to be in these spaces and helping to document the spaces that our people paid the ultimate price for us to have something as simple as the right to vote. The ability for me to literally take a Greyhound bus from New Jersey to Alabama and then back, and have the ability to say, ooh, I don't want to ride the Greyhound no more. No shade to Greyhound, right? So, but that's a choice that we actually have where we didn't always have. But the thing that's so powerful is that it's not just that work, it's to be the fact that I'm in spaces where I'm talking to people who they're like, yeah, I used to watch Dr. King's Kids. Like, what? like you knew the dude. Like, yeah, it was like Dr. King, he was cool and all, but he wasn't really the dude. Like, I'm gonna tell you who the dude was. To have these really strong conversations with people, to work with families that were a part of Selma to Montgomery March, to be in spaces where it's almost as if you hear your ancestors saying thank you. You're giving honor to the sacrifices that people made for you. For me, this work is purposeful. I think we search for what are we supposed to do and why are we on this planet. To be an architect, to walk into a space and say, I got tools for you, whether it's to get you placed on a national register, whether it's to preserve the stories of the people who are here, whether it's just to document that your building exists, because it may not exist tomorrow. I got tools for you, and I'm happy to bring them to you. You want to know what Tuskegee's campus looks like? I got a tour for you. You can click on it. You can see buildings that don't exist there any longer, but used to exist. You can learn about the history of that place. You can learn about how it was instrumental in the shaping of your parents, right? We don't get to have those conversations often, and I get to have them every day. So that's a little bit of the work that I do.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
I was just thinking this whole time, I was like, wow, what you were discussing about like having the tools, I just resonated with that very much.
So I know I didn't touch on mentorship. Did you want me to touch on that as well?
Yeah, of course.
Being a professor, everything is about the teaching. How do I communicate this knowledge? How do I translate this knowledge that I get down to the next generation? Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And if I think that I'm going to be the one who does it all, then I'm fooling myself. I'm delusional, because even right now, there's so much work to be done. I say to folks, I need at least 1,000 more students every year. Like, seriously, when you go into spaces and people call you and they say, hey, I have this building, I have this project, I need some help. And you're like, yeah, I'm like one person though. And like our squad, we got some dope people, but it's still a skeleton crew, and we got some dope students, but they ain't all there right now. Like, we are building the generations to be able to get here. It takes some time, it takes some work. And you can hire students and put them to work. And they're not being put to work on some mundane thing to connect students with histories and neighborhoods that they grew up in. To have a student working on a church that was the church that they have gone to their whole life, but didn't know the story of the church, or to tell their parents. Like, had one student was telling his grandmother the work he was doing that summer, and his grandmother was like, oh, for real? Well, I taught Congressman John Lewis when he was a kid. And he like, wait, hold on, what? Like, what? You just now telling me this? Like, you that grandma? Like, we need to get the students involved. Every grant that we go for, there's money for students. Every project we do, students are going to be with us. So I would say, the model of education that says, like, you go get it for yourself, now you got enough to go make some money. I think that's a flawed model, because it does not inherently assure that the generations behind us are able to get it, especially if the price point of education continues to rise. We will not see people who have the knowledge. And when you consider that it takes so much learning to get the knowledge in specialized areas, then you have to say, if it takes, in my case, if it took me 4 degrees to be able to do this work, if that's what it took, and we have so many kids who will never make it to the 1st degree, then that means that we automatically know that we won't have an army of people to come behind us to do the work. So there's no separation between, doing the work, teaching about the work, and mentoring in the process. It's really it's all part of the ecosystem of the work of how it's supposed to be done.
Thank you for that. That's so nice to hear, just that there are people out there knowing that like future generations need this chance, whether that be through higher education or things like that.
Oh my gosh. There's so much that I want to respond to start up with the mindset of just like, seeing yourself as someone who's eventually like going to pass these things on and like needs to pass them on, and like how that's part of the work and that the work will continue. Like, conservation desperately needs more of that mindset, because there's a sense of like power hoarding and gatekeeping here, that it's like, oh, it's us and it just has to be us. And if everyone knows how to do this, then we'll be out of a job. And it's like, no, like, it's so important. Like, succession planning. I mean, it's starting to shift, don't get me wrong, but just like, it's so refreshing to see someone who's like, yeah, no, this is the plan. Like, this was the plan from day one, like, to pass this on, because I feel like I'm not around that enough. So thank you for that.
I want to, so again, shift in mindset, right? We're supposed to make ourselves obsolete, right? Because that means there's a problem that has to be solved. If I'm still here, that means the problem's not solved. So if I'm constantly trying to keep myself here, that means I'm not giving the best of myself to the people that I'm working with. But if my goal is to make myself obsolete, my goal is to make the problem obsolete, then that means that we're going to work really hard until we get it done. And when it's done, we're going to do something else. I promise you. There's a lot of, Jay-Z say, 99 problems. Yeah, there's 99 problems out there, right? So we ain't got to just focus on one, but let's get that one solved so we can get after the other
Yeah.
99, right? So, and I'll say that part of it is that I don't know if I'm preservation at heart because my first internship was preservation, even though I'm like, no, I'm being an architect. It was like, guys, like, nah, dude, I said you're going to do some preservation work, So I don't have an image in my head about what is supposed to be preservation and how it's supposed to be passed down and why we got to guard it, right? I don't have that. I'm like, yo, there's buildings out here that need to be preserved. My community got stories that I don't have 50 years to wait for this space to become eligible to be saved because the materials it was made with, they may have only had a lifespan of 20. Or that building that we were given was built 70 years ago, but the story didn't start until 20 years ago. Like George Floyd, that's something that resonates with everybody all over the world. We got to preserve that space. We got to document that space. We got to document that block. We got to be able to say to somebody that George Floyd was killed in this spot right here, and that sent a shockwave throughout the country and around the world that people decided to start shifting where they were going to go. And if you want to know where DEI got attacked, it was when George Floyd was killed, right? It wasn't attacked right away. They just saw how many people were coming towards DEI, and they said, oh, that's a problem. And then it became a pushback. But that pushback only happened because people were saying, we got to make a shift. It's a problem that you have a person in this day and age who could be killed on television for the world to see, and people stand around and let that happen, right? When we look at all of the Confederate soldiers that were being taken down all over the country, and then we have all the monuments that were being built as anti-colonization, we have all this stuff that's happening right now. That's history. When Black Lives Matter was being painted all throughout the streets all over the country, we need to be documenting those things. So when I look at this, if we don't have enough bodies out here doing the work, when history happens, we don't have anybody on the ground to document that history to preserve it for later. Whether it's a digital preservation, whether it's just a photograph, whether it's oral histories that you're talking to people, what do you feel in this moment about Black Lives Matter being painted right down the middle of Washington, D.C.? Like, how do you feel if you don't have that army of people to go out there and do that work? Then that work ain't going to be captured, and we're going to be immediately lost to history, as opposed to being preserved in history and now being written into the textbooks, whether we're the ones writing it or somebody else. Once that history is out there, you ain't got no choice but to recognize it.
Exactly. That's why it's so important that people can come to these fields from like different paths and different backgrounds. Like one of my fears for conservation is that we're just going to like further institutionalize. Like already it's basically you have to go to graduate school and get a master's degree, like which is what I did, but like there used to be more of an apprenticeship way to get into conservation that's slowly but surely like fading out. And like I think we need to bring that back. In the same vein that you were talking about, there's like these labor shortages, traditional trades, right? The apprenticeship model is like leaving, and it doesn't need to. Like not everybody has to go to school for 4 years and then get a master's and then blah blah blah. And like in conservation, people talk about, oh, maybe we need to get PhDs, and I'm like, no, oh my god, please no.
But there's actually a value to that, right?
Sure.
And it's not an either or proposition,
right?
So I mean, we're in the process of, our aim is to develop a PhD program in preservation.
Oh, it should definitely be available. Like, yeah, I just don't want it to have to be like, oh, you need to like be able to have to do all of these things, just like start your career.
No, you don't. But what I'll say is that what I find is we need equal amount on both levels.
Uh-huh.
Because we need to have researchers who walk in the door and understand how to conduct research in spaces and understand how to apply methodology to spaces to produce a product, to analyze environments, to evaluate the conditions of a space, whether it's from a conservation standpoint or a preservation standpoint, no matter what, you know how to get in here and do that. Because if we don't create our army of doctors who can do this work, there's going to be an army of doctors who do this work, but they're going to write our history the way they want it.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to say we got folks who know how to do that. We also got folks, all right, you decided that going that route is not yours. Well, I do have a route for you. Let's go ahead and get this work done. Roll up your
Yeah.
sleeves. And guess what? I got a PhD.
Yeah.
Pretty hard, daggone work, right? We gonna get it here. We gonna get our hands dirty. Pretty hard dirt, right? We gonna get in here and we gonna work, whether it's work on a computer doing research or it's work by putting our hands in the dirt. We gonna get at this work, and I don't care if you got 30 degrees or no
Right.
degrees. The community needs the
Yes.
work, and so we gonna get at it. And so that's that mission that I'm on, because I see so much of our historic fabric disappearing by the second, and we have too few people trained to get at it.
To kind of round that out, I feel like you've already touched on it, but one thing we wanted to ask was just what's your hope for the future of preservation? What do you want to see change in the field and everything?
I want more of us to get in it. I want to see all of our communities be restored. I want to see us return to our spaces and stop running from our spaces. I want to see us recognize that same block that we look at and say is dilapidated and destroyed is actually the laboratory for the preservationists to come into. I want to see us be dedicated to still addressing the spaces that we occupy before we give it up. And we don't have, and not only do we lose the physical fabric, but we also lose the cultural fabric, because that's being eroded all over the country. And a lot of it is because we're selling the block away. And so what I hope is we had enough bodies out here learn these tools so they can get into the spaces where there's tremendous need and they can find purpose in that process.
Thank you for that answer. Wholeheartedly agree. I can't wait to hear more about this program. I just love colleges, universities really getting into preservation. There needs to be more people, but people need to understand this is a need, and how to address that is one way of having programs available, not just on the East Coast or the West Coast, also in the South and the Midwest. I won't go any further because I will go on a rant. But yes, thank you for that answer.
No, 100%. And just one thing to think about, and this is at least what resonates with me, and I think it's what resonates with our students. A lot of times our conversations about certain things are so high level, right? We talk about preservation and we show temples that we got to go preserve over in Greece or Rome. That's so high level. The cost to get out there is so high. The ability to stay over there is very high. If we talk about the preservation of films, if what I'm talking about is something that was produced by a big movie production company, that might be so high. I'm like, I don't even know how I'm gonna even get hands on those reels to preserve it or something like that. But everybody got movies that their parents made when they were a kid. Everybody has family members who have old film, old photos, old voice recordings. And now that we've transitioned out of so many different, from 8mm to DVD to VHS to flash drives to MP4s, we've gone through so many different formats. How much data is being lost on those formats? How much of that data is actually important to families? So I don't think it's hard to let people understand the power of the work. We just have to translate it in a way that makes sense. You're able to restore the sound clip, a video clip of their grandmother who passed away the day they were born. That clip right there is worth gold to them. And when we couch it like that, then it's not hard to get people. We just have to make sure we get the industry out there that once people learn what they need to learn, they know that there's a space for them to actually do their work and support themselves.
Thank you. Thank you We are
Thank you so
unfortunately
much.
at time. I feel like we could go on and on. But, want to respect your time.
I know.
So just thank you again. This was a pleasure.
It is my pleasure. It's truly been my pleasure. And I just say, keep at it. My smile is big because as I walk in spaces, and as I said, you walk in and you have something to contribute. You have something to contribute. This podcast is something to contribute. So go hard. Don't stop. And we'll see where we are in a couple of years.
I will say that a few days after recording that interview with Dr. Daniels, I have been sitting with his words a lot and just really happy to hear that there are people like him in the field of preservation, in the field of architecture, who is really thinking about mentorship and like how to create this community and create space for people in the future to be part of these professions and part of the field. And I sometimes think like that's not happening. There's always this gatekeeping or something similar to that, but it's so nice to hear that there are people like him who are doing a lot of great work and amazing work and like fun work, and also making sure that people have that space to like join in.
Yeah. When he was talking about like planning to be obsolete and like succession, I was like, yes, like it was so refreshing to be around that mindset, because I feel like that's not what you see in conservation a lot at all. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because it's like, we can't do this forever, and like things evolve and change. And so like you always need to kind of stay up to date and incorporate new perspectives and things. And I just think that mindset is a little like it's definitely improving. And I've seen conservation, make strides to like get better at mentorship and really like intentionally think about those things, just because I feel like it's been kind of like, it's something that's like just fallen between the cracks. It's kind of like, oh, you've been a bench conservator for 10 years, here's an intern or whatever. And then we don't really think about like the system of mentoring and what people are like taking away and everything like that, like as a field. And so I don't know, that interview was fantastic. He said so many great things, and it was just validating for me as like an emerging professional that like this mindset is like out there and like established and everything. Cause sometimes I feel like I have ideas and I'm like, I know this isn't even like that big of an idea, but I don't see it around me. Like, what's happening? And so it turns out it's just, I guess, fewer and far between that I would like.
Since Nyla and I are only 2 of the 20 members of BAC, we thought it would be helpful for the audience to hear from other BAC voices. So, to close out the show, we have created a segment we like to call Conservator Spotlight.
In each spotlight, we'll highlight the work of one of BAC's members so you can hear from more than just us. This episode of our spotlight is on Lastarsha McGarity, who's the conservator and co-director at the Legacy Museum at Tuskegee University.
I spent some time at the National Gallery of Art as a Andrew W. Mellon Fellow in Objects Conservation. And I was fortunate to work on a piece by Renee Stout entitled If I Knew Back Then What I Know Now, which is a mixed media assemblage. It is a reused cigar box with a glass lid. Inside of that cigar box, the background is lace with a sealed envelope, a photograph of an unknown woman, and 2 bottles. One is an empty Jack Daniels bottle, and one is a bottle of seeds. I was documenting exactly what was present, and I put in my report that the bottle contained mustard seeds. And my supervisor at the time asked me how I knew that they were mustard seeds, whose expertise I was depending on, and I was depending on my own. And that was not good enough to identify them as mustard seeds, but I was relying on my background. I grew up Southern Baptist, and it was often a gift in the church to receive mustard seeds as you completed different milestones. So I was very aware that those were mustard seeds. But it was frustrating for me that we have to, within the field, privilege these empirical sources of knowledge when community knowledge is just as beneficial and should be just as heavily weighted. I pushed until I talked to the artist to put it in the report. And then I wrote about the experience in the Black church that makes them significant in terms of a Black artist using mustard seeds. So although that wasn't traditionally supposed to be in the report, I felt it was important for the next person who would very likely not have that cultural context to understand our field is deeply entrenched and tied to imperialism and colonialism and racism. And when you privilege one method of knowing over another, you are reinforcing that. And so sometimes the easiest way to combat it is to literally just write a paragraph and say, this is the cultural context who most of the field would not have, because our field is 89% white. Preservation does not privilege people, then it's not preservation. Because we need to ensure that people and their access and their connection with artifacts is always the forefront. Because without that, then there's no way for us to really fully preserve and fully experience an artifact if we cut it off from the people who give it life. If no one has access, if no one can view it, if no one can connect with it, if there are certain things that really help people experience it and you're not letting that happen, it just makes it really sad to me. Like there's a piece at the National Gallery of Art and it's made out of chocolate. It's a bust by Janine Antoni. And when they put it in a case to protect it, sometimes it cuts off the smell of the chocolate, which is really part of the piece. And so we have to kind of convince them to occasionally open the case and let the smell waft out. So that way that gallery continues to smell like chocolate, because that helps you experience that piece and understand that this isn't what you think it is. Because as you approach it, you kind of think this might be bronze, this might be some sort of cast, and then you realize that it's chocolate and that we are trying to preserve chocolate.
Thanks for joining us on Preservation for the People, brought to you by Black art conservators and supported by a racial and social justice grant from the University of California, Los Angeles.
Many thanks to everyone who made this episode possible. The UCLA Coates Institute of Archaeology and the UCLA Getty Interdepartmental Program in Conservation of Cultural Heritage. Andrew Calloway, Decca Hussein Wetzel, and Vanessa Quirk of Urbanist Media. If you or your organization are interested in making a podcast, then reach out to them at urbanistmedia.org.
Keep a lookout for the next episode where we talk about everyday Blackness and how that relates to our preservation and conservation work.
We're here.
Get used to it. And remember, preservation is for the people.